Welcome to another wisdom podcast with Weiser with us today. Jay is Chief Catalyst and Navigator at Weiser Consulting. We're going to talk about crisis leadership, of course, organizational resilience, organizational preparedness, risk management, and everything in between. Executive coaching will certainly be a fun topic too. Jay is a speaker, loves doing podcasts as well. It's all about education, and he's also a CEO and stands on some boards of advisor. So, eager to dive into that one. This pod is presented to you by podpair.com. That's my podcasting agency. If you want to start, scale, or be invited to a podcast like this one, you can go to podpair.com. Jay, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and about what is it that you do nowadays.
Sure, Charles. Thanks. Thank you for having me. So, first, I'm based in Atlanta, and my focus is working with executives, leadership teams, boards, and organizations on how to help them be prepared for the future, how to help them thrive in a world where crises are happening all over the place. Big international things as well as competitor innovations, customer demands, regulation. Everything's coming in together, and leaders still continue to get surprised despite everything they've been through over the last 20 years. The pace of change is high. If you don't get prepared, if you're not future fit, you're going to fall behind and it becomes an existential threat. You might not be around at all. So I've developed a leadership capability model called the 5 leadership superpowers that I use with organizations, boards, again, leadership teams. And the superpowers are kind of an overlay on top of core leadership skills. And they address 5 tensions that leaders face, and that's between the present and future. Where do I focus? And it's not an either or question. They need to focus on both. So the first superpower is being a present futurist. So let me just pause there for a moment. Suspect you might have some questions.
Yeah, well, how did you get started? How did you get to where you are today? And reflecting on that career of yours, what have been the highlights?
So my background has been in consulting for probably close to 30 years. I started off in banking. And one of the things that I learned in banking is that there's a story behind the numbers, there's a strategy. And numbers don't mean a whole lot if you don't understand what's going on behind them and whether or not anybody can put together an Excel spreadsheet that shows growth going up like this. The question is, what are the assumptions behind it? What are the risks? So really understanding strategy. So that became my passion. And as I got into strategy and strategy execution, I realized the importance of leadership, not just individual leadership, but leadership team dynamics, and recognizing, with silos, that so much work needs to involve multiple people across the organization. I talk about strategy being a team sport. So I worked for an organization called the Palladium Group. And Palladium Group was founded by 2 Harvard Business School professors who developed an approach called the Balanced Scorecard. Balanced Scorecard was all about strategy execution, and they had like 5 books. And during that time, I worked across multiple industries, from supermarket chains to JP Morgan Chase, Bristol Myers Squibb, Tiffany high-end luxury goods, and I worked with functional leaders, HR, IT, marketing, finance, and really learning how those groups need to work together. Fast forward, after doing that for well over a decade, you start to get into the 20 teens, and you're finding more and more disruptions, whether H1N1, you go back earlier in 2001, we had 9/11, anthrax scare. I mean, you think about all these different events, and people, when COVID first happened, said, oh, this is a 1 in 100 year event. Well, yeah, it was, but think about all the 1 in 100 year events that have occurred. They're happening more often, and you start to see how interconnected things are. So, as I've gone through each step of my career, one piece is built on the other. Having that strategy foundation, adding in that leadership foundation, and now that leadership under uncertainty foundation. And I think what makes me unique is that integration, that there are people, organizations that, look at a piece of the problem, but don't look at it holistically, don't look at how the pieces have to integrate and come together. And that's what I bring.
Interesting. Now, tell us about what happened at OpenAI with the board saga and how that could have gone better.
You know, boards are under increasing pressure to improve governance, to be on top of things. It's not just enough to have super experienced people who, all CEOs on a board, because past success does not predict future performance, first of all. Second of all, the market doesn't like surprises. And employees, when you have a leader like Sam Altman, where it's not just that he has followers. A lot of leaders don't have followers. He has followers. It was a close-knit organization. The board was not very transparent in terms of what was going on, what the issues were. It came out of left field. If board members were tuned to what was going on, inside and outside the company. I mean, AI is complex. I mean, you've got regulation, you've got politics involved, you have a fear factor involved. A lot of people don't understand it or are starting to understand it and the benefits. And that shook up a system that was very agile and kind of took a baseball bat to it. And baseball bats are not very good strategic tools.
They're not. Yeah, and almost the full board got replaced as a result. With the latest trends, we're post-COVID now. The economy is not doing super well. What leadership challenges do you see surfacing in organizations nowadays?
So I think part of the challenge is we're not going back to 2019. And I think some folks are still saying, okay, when things calm down, I'll have time to do this. Everything I've read, whether it's the World Economic Forum, McKinsey, Wall Street Journal, Fortune, Forbes, everybody's saying the next several years are going to be as turbulent, if not more turbulent. So leaders have to start to learn, how do I lead in that environment? How do I lead in that environment when my employees are burnt out? When I still have leaders who are doing things the old way, where it's more short-term thinking. Now, nobody can predict the future, but if you're monitoring signals, looking at trends, talking to customers, listening to employees, engaged in your community, you're going to be better able to address whatever comes up. If you think about something, just as we were coming out of COVID, Ukraine hit. And initially we said, oh, Ukraine's over there. And then all of a sudden you realize it was hitting our pocketbooks. And it was a human rights crisis, but now gas prices go up. Now it's affecting inflation. Now it's affecting power dynamics. Now it's affecting different regions. It's affecting trade. So it's how all these things are interconnected. You look at stuff in the Middle East now, again, something seemingly out of the blue, but also foreseeable. I would hope, and it probably didn't always happen, but I'm sure some Israeli companies never thought something like that could happen. And when you start to think about that, and people say, "Oh, we don't know how to react," and maybe that's a poor example. Let me change tack for a minute. So, like with COVID, people said, "Oh, I could have never been prepared. We've never seen anything like this before." Well, 1917 Spanish flu, H1N1, swine flu. So we've dealt with Ebola, different types of pandemics, epidemics, maybe not on that scale. Travel industry was decimated with 9/11, hotels, everything tied together. Same thing happened with COVID. We've been through the Great Recession, 2008, 2010. So we've had those economic issues before. We haven't seen them all together, but there were certainly plenty of lessons along the way. So it's this recognition in today's world, stuff spreads fast. Everything's interconnected. You have to have a higher state of preparedness. You're not going to be ready for everything. But if you think about, in your own house, you have a smoke detector. You might fire alarm, carbon monoxide detector. You might have a extra supply of water, toilet paper. You think a call list to make sure you're taking care of your family. If all of a sudden there was an earthquake, who do you contact? How do you let people know? Companies need to do the same thing and have those same protections in place. It's about getting away from reacting and being able to respond. And if you have that prepared posture, you're going to think before you act. And if you're thinking, you're going to make a better choice than just emotionally saying, oh crap, what do I do now?
What are the 5 types of leadership that you identified? The 5 leadership superpowers you called them. Tell me a bit more about them and let's talk about each.
Great. So the first superpower, I talked about the tension between present and future. So that superpower is being a present futurist. It's about better understanding the present by looking at it from different perspectives: employee, customer, competitor, ecosystem partners, understanding the macro environment. All that has to come together. The second part is the futurist piece. It's about tracking trends, monitoring signals, thinking about alternative scenarios and where you want to go. It's integrating that information so when you make a decision, it's informed by where you are, what's happening in front of you, what could happen, and where you want to go. So it's that integration, it's that both and thinking. The second one is experience learner. So a lot of folks, the first thing they do when something happens is they go back to what they know. They go back to, for the last 20 years, I've done it this way. Well, when the environment changes, very often that's insufficient. So you want to leverage experience that works and is relevant and be open to challenging it if it's not working. You want to promote curiosity. You want to ask questions. You want to make it a safe environment for employees to contribute. You want to welcome debate, being challenged. And it's not just about people below you needing to learn. It's about senior executives needing to learn. The third superpower is being a prepared risk taker. Now, when a crisis hits, the first thing a lot of companies do is they play not to lose versus playing to win. It's offense that scores points. Defense doesn't win games, offense does. And risk taking is a core part of business. No matter what decision you make, taking no action involves risk. So it's about taking smart, measured risks. And you need to do that to grow the business. On the other side, being prepared starts with being risk aware, understanding those interconnections I talked about. It's about how do you look at risk more strategically, and what steps can you take in terms of being prepared to reduce uncertainty, to mitigate some of that risk, because you can do that by being more proactive. And that's where preparedness comes in. So again, it's one of those things. Again, it's not one or the other. A lot of times risk management is only about compliance. It's only about, covering your backside, versus thinking about, what value can you create by being prepared, by taking risk. Fourth is strategic executor. So it's balancing strategy and operations. It's understanding they're linked together. Having a strategy you can't execute is useless. And execution without a strategy is a lot of busyness that's going nowhere. So it's tying the two together. It's making sure that when you make short-term decisions, you're not impairing your long-term ability to perform. It means, instead of cutting to the bone when something isn't going as well, how do you reallocate? How do you treat your people? Because the thing is, if you cut and you lose all this brain power, and then things get better and you want to have those people who come back, they're going to say, why would I want to work for a company like this? So it's thinking on both sides. And the last one, and probably, one of the ones that's most foundational, is being an accountable collaborator. So it's recognizing that cross-functional collaboration is essential to companies now, going back to strategy being a team sport. And collaboration means having a shared goal. It means focusing on a shared outcome. For it to work, you need to have the right people on the team. Doesn't mean all VPs. It doesn't mean, every department has to be part of it. The question is, who's relevant, who has the capabilities, and who has the skills. And teams can be accountable, because, a lot of times accountability is about pointing the finger. Who can I blame? And individuals can't do these things alone. So it's getting that team together. Think about a special ops team. They have a mission, they work together. They can't succeed individually. They either succeed as a group or they don't. So it's the same thing. The 5 superpowers each support one another, each inform one another. So when you have all 5, which a leadership team should have, you're eliminating a lot of blind spots. Now, an individual probably will be, or should strive to be, proficient in 1 to 3, but when you put that team together, you have full coverage.
What would be the top challenges leader would be facing next year and for the next decade to come with AI, for example?
You froze for a minute there. You said
Yeah, I guess the
challenges.
biggest mega trend right now is AI. How will that impact and challenge today's leaders in the next decade?
So I think, where AI comes in is figuring out how best to leverage it. We know not everything it says is necessarily true. On the other hand, I know from my own experience how it works to augment my productivity. I can do research a lot faster. It's like I joke, like having a very well-educated intern who can do a lot of the initial work for you. It's incredibly powerful. I encourage people, to explore and play with it. Now, there's a lot of other applications, obviously, besides Bard and ChatGPT, stuff much more complex. I think it's breaking down some of that fear barriers. If we go back and think about other technological leaps, when I remember, we first got laptops, first had computers, and they were glorified typewriters. But over time, we found out how powerful they are, how they can assist. That happens so much faster with technology now. And, I think it's also recognizing, they're not going to take over for humans. That, when I'm talking about the complex issues we're discussing now, you need judgment. You need to understand interpersonal dynamics. You need to understand feelings. You need to understand background. So, it's how do you leverage both of those? How do you get rid of some of the less value added tasks so that people can be focused on, what's more important, what plays to their talents, what plays to their potential?
What would be your top goals for the next year, Jay, in terms of life and business?
So, in terms of life, I'm very proud of my kids. They both one got a master's degree, one is at Harvard Law now. And, so helping them as they think about their careers, number one. Number two, from a business perspective, I've spent the last year really building a following, sharing my thought leadership, sharing the model, promoting it, talking about the challenges that leaders are facing. Next year, it's about putting that into action. I'm already starting to line up clients for presentations, for training programs, for assessments. There's definitely a need, so it's really about unleashing the power of the superpowers and getting that out to as many leaders as possible, because there's a lot of untapped leadership and organizational and personal potential. And the world would be a much better place if that potential can get applied to a lot of the problems we're facing. So that for me is job number one.
Where can we find out more about you, Jay?
So you can find out more about me. One is through my LinkedIn. If you just search jrwi, I'll be the first person that comes up, or if you Google me. My website is www.jweiser.com. And my email is j@jweiser.com. And, I offer a complimentary discovery call to talk with folks, understand their challenges, and to give advice and look at how I can help them.